Thanks for joining us for Season 3 of the Stories Unveiled podcast. Stories Unveiled exists to create a platform for people to share hope through personal stories of what Jesus does in their life. Each episode highlights a different guest, just like you and I, wading through this life that can be so messy. I hope this conversation proves helpful and encourages you to go live unveiled. Today, I have Hayley Slaughter in the studio with me. Hayley is an advocate for live organ donations to veterans. She has been featured on the cover of Christian Living magazine, as an ad in Military Times magazine. Her story was also featured in Women's Day magazine, and she received the Idaho Spirit of Freedom Award. She's very humble and hates that I am saying all of these things about her, but it is all true. Hayley, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So you are an organ donor.
Yes.
Okay, you're wearing a pin that says, what does that say? Tell me about that.
It says Dove, give to help vets live. And it stands for Donor Outreach for Veterans.
Okay, and what is that? What does that organization do? Do you work there?
Yes, I work currently for Dove. I'm their outreach coordinator.
Okay.
And so Dove was started in 2020 to help meet the need for our veterans who are currently waiting for a kidney transplant. So there's currently roughly about 100,000 people on the transplant list.
Wow.
And when people tend to hear that, they get very overwhelmed and they think, I can't possibly make a difference. But there's about 2,000 veterans waiting for a kidney. So our goal is to one day eliminate the wait for all veterans and to spread awareness, get the conversation started, because it's not talked about. It's not part of everyday conversation.
Yeah.
And we want to hopefully one day end the wait for all.
Yeah. So just kidneys?
Yes.
Just kidneys. Okay. And where is this based out of?
So Dove headquarters is in New Jersey.
Okay.
But we help transplant veterans all across
the United States.
Yes, wherever they're located.
Okay. That's awesome. And you yourself, like I said, you yourself are a kidney donor.
Yes.
And tell me about that, because you and I had a conversation and you told me that this is kind of a calling that you felt like was on your life for a long time. So
yes.
Tell me about that.
When I was 8, I very much wanted to be a bone marrow donor.
8 years old?
8 years old, yes.
You wanted to be a bone marrow donor. I don't think many 8-year-olds know what bone marrow is.
No, I was definitely the odd child for that. At the time, I didn't realize that it was God putting his will for me as a desire on my own heart. I knew God, I went to church, but I didn't really have a relationship with him.
Okay.
So at the time, I didn't know that's what it was. I just knew I was the weird kid who wanted to give bone marrow. And I remember calling the Red Cross and I asked them, how old do I have to be to donate blood, bone marrow, my kidney? So I started donating blood at 15. And then when I was 18, I joined the bone marrow registry and the live tissue registry. So with bone marrow, what happens is your DNA is in the system. If you're a match, they call you and you go from there. So I thought that's what happened with the kidney.
Okay.
So I kind of forgot about it, honestly. And then in spring of 2022, I was reading my Women's Day magazine and I came across an article about Dove, and my husband is a veteran. He served 20 years in the Air Force, and it was about how you can save a veteran's life by giving a kidney. And I was like, well, I want to do that.
You're like, wait a minute.
This is perfect.
Yeah.
So I called them, and 6 to 8 weeks later, I was at Walter Reed donating my kidney, which is not the norm. It usually takes 3 to 5 months to get medically cleared. So that is not the norm for how quick it went.
My gosh. So where is Walter Reed?
It is in Bethesda, Maryland.
In Maryland. Okay. So you live in Idaho.
Yes.
So that's not close.
No.
So it was like fast tracked. They were like, and we need you here.
I had the mindset that I wanted to get everything done as fast as possible on my end, because if I wasn't going to be a kidney donor, I wanted them to stop focusing on me and focus on someone who could. And I wanted to make sure that whoever got my kidney got it as soon as possible, because I didn't know their story. I didn't know if they were on dialysis or I just knew they needed a kidney, and I wanted to do it as quickly as possible. So I did an intake over the phone. I filled out a healthcare questionnaire. And then I went to my local hospital and did 24-hour urine test and blood test. And once I passed that, Walter Reed flew me and my husband down, and we did more 2-day in-person extensive extensive testing.
Okay. So what is usually like the process? Yours seems to be like fast-tracked and kind of the anomaly, yes. But like what is usually the process? Like for anybody that's maybe wondering like, how do I get involved in this?
Yeah, so when you contact Dove, they will ask you just a couple questions that would disqualify you across the board from being a donor. So if you're diabetic or have uncontrolled high blood pressure, and if there's a specific veteran you want to donate to, we will refer you to that transplant center. Oh. With me, I said I'll go anywhere, give it to whoever. So I was originally referred to one in New Jersey, and I was declined from there. So what happens is you fill out the health care questionnaire, and then somebody from the transplant team contacts you. And so they had declined me because I have polycystic ovarian syndrome and my mom is diabetic. So I thought that was it. I called Dove, and that's when I learned that some transplant centers are more strict than others. So just because one transplant center rejected you, that doesn't mean another one won't. So then she referred me to Walter Reed. So again, the same thing. And I had a conversation with them, and they also go off of BMI. So most transplant centers will take up to 35 of a BMI.
Okay.
So I was just under, and I was pleading with them. I said, look, BMI doesn't necessarily indicate health. And I said, I lift weights, I do Taekwondo, I do yoga, I'm very active.
Yeah.
Yes, so please don't just go off of the fact that my mom is diabetic and I have PCOS. Look at me as a person. And so that was actually when I first handed control over to God at that point, because I was still trying to get his will to align with my will.
Yeah, like square peg, round hole, like make this work.
And I was waiting for the phone call from them to let me know their decision. And that's when I had handed control over to him and said, thy will be done. So then they called me. They said, okay, we're gonna move forward. So then I did the testing at my local hospital. And then I was flown down, and I had to meet with the entire transplant team, a social worker, healthcare worker, pharmacist, nutritionist, the surgeon. I had to meet with infectious disease control. Wow. And then they do a battery of tests like EKG, chest x-ray, a CT contrast scan with dye. More blood work, more urine. So it's very extensive testing.
Yeah, and then so they do all the physical tests, and then they do like a mental or emotional
so when you
evaluation?
So when you meet with the social worker and the psychiatrist, they're making sure that you have adequate support, that you're in a good mind frame to do this, making sure that you understand what you're doing, and that you don't, I guess, have any unrealistic expectations, like you're going to get paid or get something out of it.
That's actually really good to note, that like this is something you do because, for you especially, but like because you felt like God has called you to do this. But this is something, that's why it's a donation, right?
Yes. And I meant it when I told my recipient that it was a no strings attached gift.
Yeah.
And I made sure that my heart was ready for that, because I didn't want to have expectations. So when I was able to meet her, and she wanted to meet as well, and I let her know, this is no strings attached gift to you. You're under no obligation. You owe me nothing. Like, I want to give this to you. And I really let her decide where to go from there. And so she's very private, and I want to respect her.
Totally.
But I can share she's doing very well, and we are still in touch.
That's awesome. So you did get to meet her. Is that standard? Like, do all recipients and donors get to meet?
No, it depends. If the recipient and the donor both want to meet, they can. And some transplant centers will have you wait for a while after. But we have some donors who wish to remain anonymous. And then we have some recipients who choose not to meet. We will have some donors who choose to wait until they know the recipient's doing well. So it's just a case-by-case basis. Walter Reed, how they explained it to me was they would arrange for us to meet the day before. And I had requested that the nurse give my recipient my phone number, because I thought that'd be really hectic to wait until the day before surgery to meet. And so my recipient did contact me a couple weeks before, and we FaceTimed, and that was the first time. And then when I flew in for the surgery, we met that night.
Okay, because you went in a little bit before the surgery.
Yeah, so the surgery was scheduled for a Thursday. I flew in on a Tuesday.
Okay.
And we checked in Wednesday night, and I was released Friday from the hospital.
Oh my gosh. So tell me about that, like the recovery. So I've heard that like bone marrow, for instance, is like really hard on the donor as well. Like, I don't know anything about that. It's just what I've heard. I imagine that like giving an organ, I mean, they're like removing something from you, that there's probably some level of recovery that goes into that.
There is. So most people don't know that once you donate a kidney, you can return to work within 2 weeks if you have a low impact, like desk job.
That's wild.
So I was released, like I said, the next day from the hospital, and about 3 days later, I walked 6 miles. I was walking slow, but I walked.
But you were active nonetheless.
Yes, I didn't have to take any pain medicine, but not to sugarcoat it, I felt really well. I was sore, and you have gas pain. So that was the hard part, was at night, laying down. I couldn't lay down flat.
And gas pain, I just want to, because I have experienced what you're talking about, because they pump gas into your abdomen.
Air, yes.
Or whatever, like air, right, into your abdomen. I have also had abdominal surgery, and it's like the pain of like that dissipating or moving, like,
and the pressure
is unreal. It is unreal.
Yes, and so I noticed it more at night, but I just had such a deep feeling of peace in my soul. I was so happy. I was so excited that I got to do this, and so I was just sore. Yeah. And I was determined to see the DC area. I'd never been there, and so I was like,
why
a vacation
not?
For me. The fact that I gave a kidney was no big deal.
That's awesome. But you got to do something amazing for somebody that was in need and that needed it.
Yes.
And so you didn't already work with Dove?
No.
Right?
Not at that time.
So how did that transpire?
2 days after the donation, I was in my hotel room, and I felt that God was calling me to share my story. And I was like, I don't have a platform, God. Who's going to want to hear this? Yeah. So I said, if you bring the door to me, I'll walk through it. And I really felt that I wanted to get the conversation started. So during this whole process, I was actually sharing it on social media, which I tend to wait till I've accomplished the goal before I post about it. But I was like, maybe if I share the process, it'll start the conversation. Yeah. And so that was my goal. And I really felt he was calling me to share. And so I'd contacted Sharon at Dove, and I said, can I be a mentor? Can I be somebody who talks to donors who are going through the process? And she's like, why don't you wait till you recover first?
I'm sitting in a hotel room, recovering from everything, but I just want to get this going.
Yes. And so then that following November, I was featured in Women's Day magazine. And
for the record, the same magazine that you had read.
Yes.
I just clued into that. It's the same magazine that you had read about Dove, right?
Yes. Okay. And so I contacted them, and I let them know your article saved a life. And they said, hey, we want to follow up on this. Yeah. So yes. Cool. And that was kind of what really started it. And I just realized the more I spoke to people, they want to help. They just don't know how. Yeah. And I remembered how I felt and how I didn't know the first thing about being a kidney donor, because I didn't know somebody who needed a transplant. I didn't know anybody on dialysis. I wasn't involved in that world. And also I came to realize there was a lot of fear and unknown, because it's just not talked about. And so the two main fears or questions I was encountering was, what is my life going to look like after I donate? And the other main fear was, well, what if my child needs a kidney? And so I knew I was going to be okay. Yeah. As a believer, I knew God wasn't going to call me to this mountain just to be like, bye. Yeah. When it was time to climb it. And so I always tell people, the month I donated, I got my purple belt in Taekwondo. 8 months after, I got my brown stripe. And here recently, I just got my black stripe. It'll be 2 years in June of 2024. Wow. And I do that to tell people it doesn't slow you down. I forget all the time that I only have one kidney. I focus more on hydration. That's more important. Yeah. And, they tell you that you have to be careful with protein. Most donors don't have to change their diet. So they just told me to avoid keto diet, which is really high in protein, and to avoid protein supplements or powders, which I don't take anyway.
Because of your body processing, is that filtered through your kidneys?
Yes. And so too much protein can be really hard on the one kidney.
Got it.
And then you just can't have NSAIDs anymore. So basically Tylenol yes, only. Is your best friend. Yeah. And then other than that, I forget all the time. There's a group of kidney donors who just climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. What? And they do it every couple years, and they do that to bring awareness. And I noticed during that process when they had a lot of fear, and they said, well, what if your child needs a kidney later? And so I would tell them how extensive the testing was. And I was like, if my child needs a kidney, there's probably going to be a genetic component at play. I've been cleared. I'm not worried about it. And as a kidney donor, if something ever for some reason happens to me and I need a transplant, I'm bumped to the top of the transplant list for being a living donor.
Wow.
And so when I would tell people that, you kind of see a light bulb go off in their head, like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. So how, like, you have kids?
Yes, I have 3.
You have 3 kids. And you're married because your husband, he's retired?
Yes, he's retired Air Force.
So how, or if at all, did this affect, like, your family?
Well, I actually asked my husband that recently, and he didn't think it really affected him, but I think it strengthened our marriage and it wasn't a shock to him. He knew this was something I had thought about doing, but he came home from work and we sat down for a dinner and I said, hey, I made a phone call today to see if I can donate my kidney to a veteran. And he's just like, okay. 6 weeks later, here we are in the OR. He's supported me 100%, unwavering support. And I think it really just strengthened the marriage. And it really showed me that this is God, because he's supporting us and he's giving him the confidence to know that I will be okay and to trust him. For our kids, my daughter is 8, and I think it's a tangible way to show, because as Christians, we're taught to be the hands and feet of Jesus, to love our neighbor and to give our lives away. And I think it's a great way to show her how we can do that. And because at the time, I didn't know if I would meet my recipient. And people really struggled. When I told them I was donating to a stranger, they really struggled with that. And if I had been giving to someone I knew, it would have been easier for them to understand. But the fact that I didn't know the person and I wasn't guaranteed to meet them or have a relationship, then I said, well, they're not a stranger, they're a child of God. And I didn't know if they were going to have the same faith or the same beliefs or anything, but all I knew is they are a child of God. And the book of Matthew really helped a lot, especially chapter 25. And he's saying, whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. And so we can practice what we preach and we can live that out. And I think it really helps, especially my daughter, as she's learning and coming into the faith. And she can really see a tangible way that we can do that.
Wow. And that's a very big, tangible way.
Yes.
And not conventional, like in the sense, right? Like a tangible way, like we give money or we give our time or, whatever, but like a kidney, like but it's also a very real need.
And I believe God gave me 2 and you only need 1.
Yeah.
And so he gave me 2 so that I could share my spare. And so a lot of people just don't know you only need 1 kidney.
Oh yeah, no, totally.
And I remember telling somebody,
there's a lot of things we don't necessarily need, right? Like, God gave them to us for a reason, but.
Well, I remember I told somebody that. I said, well, I only have 2 and I have 2 and I only need 1. And I was taught how to share in kindergarten. They go, this isn't milk and cookies. This isn't cookies at snack time. I was like, well, same thing, You're
like, I don't have a need for it. It's fine.
Right, exactly. And I think it just kind of blew a lot of people away. But I was like, no, I'm going to be okay. I only need 1.
So kind of tell me about that, like the pushback that you received. Like, did it ever cause doubt in you to be like, yeah, I guess they have a point? Or were you just like, no, steadfast in God has called me to do this?
I had a couple moments of doubt, little pinpricks. I describe it more as like the wind was kind of taken out of my sail. I never once doubted this is what I was going to do. For the most part, I did have a lot of support because I told my husband, I said, God is calling me to do this, but I can't do this alone. I can't do this without you. And then I had a great support system, people who watched my kids, my animals, our house. They brought us meals and they really supported it. And those who really knew me, this wasn't a shock whatsoever.
And so your core people, like that you had support from them.
Yes.
And so that was obviously the most important.
Yes.
But the pushback maybe was from
other people. I had one person tell me I was being really selfish because if something were to happen to me, I would leave my kids without a mother. And that was really hard to hear because
absolutely.
I knew I was going to be okay no matter what. And I even told my husband, I said, listen, even if something goes wrong and I pass away, I know where I'm going and they can donate the rest of my organs. We can save more people in one go. So, but I knew it wouldn't come to that. I knew I would be okay. And it was hard because I was very clearly hearing God, but other people weren't.
Yeah.
And that's when I really realized we need to get this conversation started because that's where the fear was coming from.
Yeah, well, and it's like nobody heard God tell Noah to build a boat either.
Exactly.
Like God heard, Noah heard God.
Yes.
And he knew what he was supposed to do. And it sounded crazy. And it's not the what ifs and all of the things, right? But so you knew, and you heard, and you felt the peace, and God had already told you that you were going to be okay.
Yes.
Like God already went before you and was
Yes.
like, but see, look, and you saw that, and you knew that, and you had confidence in
Yes,
him. And
I was very excited. I was very, very excited to do this. When I got the phone call that I was cleared, I was just screaming
Like
randomly. Yes, and my son at the time was a young toddler, and he was just randomly going around screaming too.
Yeah.
He just knew I was excited.
Yeah.
But I just knew I was going to be okay. I was more nervous to meet my recipient and their family than I was to give my recipient my kidney.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know. I am neurodivergent and I struggle sometimes with social situations, and I just didn't know what the social protocol was going to be and how to like maneuver that. So I was more nervous about meeting them than I was about doing the surgery.
The actual donation
Yes.
and all of those things. Wow, that's crazy, but like in such a good way. That's so awesome. So tell me, so I ask everybody this question during the podcast, but tell our listeners what encouragement you would have for them if they are walking through this season of like, they feel so clearly like what God is telling them to do. They're trying to walk out this calling that they have on their life, which is something you really had kind of pursued both maybe on and off since you were like 8, right? Like, so this has been a long journey. What about somebody who's listening who is also kind of walking this long journey of something that they feel called to do, and maybe they're meeting resistance, or maybe they don't feel like there's doors open? What encouragement would you have for them?
To hold fast and hold on to what you know is true. I know with me personally, I had to let go of control. And I like to plan. I like to know what's going to happen. I like to be in charge. And I really had to let go.
Yeah.
I was, like I said earlier, I was trying to lead God versus actually listening and doing what he wanted to do. So for me, I'm a very strong-willed person. And while that's a great trait in some areas, God needed me to be compliant.
Yeah.
And he needed me to do what he wanted me to do. So I think it would just be really digging deep and looking in, and where is the resistance coming from? Where are your doubts coming from? Voice them. It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to have fear, but God keeps his promises.
Yeah.
He doesn't leave us. And when you see one set of footprints, it's because he's carrying you.
I used to have that hanging in my home growing up.
Yes, and so I can look back and I can see little tiny things that led me to this moment that were really difficult before I even knew what they were. And one of them was, we had been at our church for 10 years. I played flute in the worship band. That was the first church I felt connected to. That's how I worship. And he called us to leave the church. And I didn't want to. I didn't understand why.
That church or the church?
That church.
That church.
Yes, that specific church.
Okay.
And I didn't want to, but he was like, if you won't listen to me and trust me now on this small thing, you won't trust me later when I call you to donate your kidney. And I think that was the first step in him preparing my heart for this big thing he was calling me towards. And I just had to give up the control. And so I would tell everybody to live your life with your palms open to receive and to give freely, and just know that he is on your side. And if he's on your side, you can do anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that's something, when I started Stories Unveiled and this organization and this podcast, that's something that I've said from the beginning, and those are conversations that I've had with God the whole time. Like, this is how I hold it, with open hands, always. Like, so I'm not gripping it and constantly trying to, and sometimes it's a struggle, right? But even in life, like, to relinquish that and to just like hold it with open hands.
And as I grow in my faith and everything, because that was the first time I really clearly knew God was calling me to do something, was to donate the kidney. And I had to come to terms with the fact, because I struggled. I was like, if I really want this, could it really be his will?
Yeah.
And I had a very wise friend speak to me, and that's when she said, God puts his will for us as desires on our own hearts. And that really clicked, and it made a lot of sense. And I just remember feeling guilty. Like, I wanted this so bad, and I felt like I got a lot out of it. And I felt guilty because I noticed that people would put me on a pedestal and they would say, you're a better person than I am. And it really made me uncomfortable, because I was like, no, I'm not.
That's not what this is about.
No. And I felt like, because again, the conversation wasn't out there, it wasn't started, that that needed to change. And they were idolizing people who are kidney donors and thinking they couldn't possibly make a difference.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, you can. So that's when I really felt I needed to be transparent and open and honest and just share my story as often as I can.
Yeah. And I know we had a conversation. You kind of wrestled with sharing your story.
Yes.
You kind of wrestled with that idea because you were like, you don't want it to seem self-serving. You don't want it to seem like you are putting yourself up here. But it's just funny and divine in my opinion, as far as Stories Unveiled. Like that's what I do is I consistently try to change this culture of like, this isn't self-serving. We share our stories and we share what we're going through to raise awareness for certain things, but of what God has done and what he is doing in our lives. And it's a way to glorify him, and it's a way to point people to him, not to us.
Yes.
He just uses our stories to be able to do that.
And if you're going to be a light, you don't hide the light, you shine so others can see his good works.
Yeah.
And so I feel like if I can show everybody how well I'm doing after and be really candid about it and just show, it's been almost 2 years at this point in June of 2024. And if I can just show how well I've done since and then continuing to do.
Yeah.
And then maybe it'll inspire somebody to take that step.
Totally. Okay. So last thing, will you tell our listeners where they can find information about Dove?
Yes, they can go to dovetransplant.org.
Okay. Is there social media?
Yes, we are on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn as well.
Cool. And they can go and they can find information, phone number, all sorts of ways to maybe get a hold of you guys. Perfect. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you and your story.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's conversation on the Stories Unveiled podcast. We would love it if you would leave us a rating or review. If you would like to learn more about Stories Unveiled and our events, go to storiesunveiledconference.com or follow us on Facebook or Instagram at storiesunveiled_. The Stories Unveiled podcast is created in partnership with KTSY and Barefoot Media Ministries. For more encouragement and other podcasts, visit ktsy.org. Have an incredible day and go live unveiled.